Did you know of? Were you a Stern listener? Did you know of him? Were you a fan? And did you realize he was kind of off? Was he already? I mean, by the time you guys write that first book, he's already had his sleeping on the air and kind of talked about his heroin. So just tell me a little bit about the history of you knowing about him, and then were you understanding this is going to be a strange guy to work with?
Yeah, well, I grew up on Long Island, so I mean, I was a Stern guy for sure. That was like a huge part of my upbringing, and I totally knew about Artie, and I thought it was hilarious. And I really, I always had friends in school that were the ones that got in trouble, and it's kind of the same way with a lot of the more difficult yet super interesting people I've chosen to co-write with. I guess I just like that kind of crap. So I knew what the issues might be and stuff like that, but. I had basically lived with Tommy Lee. I'd written with Slash. So I kind of knew a bit of that. And Artie's just so damn funny. I wanted to do it. So charming. And we had a lot in common, but being Italian American and stuff like that. So I wasn't worried about that. And also, we did Too Fat to Fish. This is deep in the period for everyone who's read all the books and knows the Artie lore. This is the period where he was most together with the lying and the keeping it together, yet doing shit on the sly. So that was the best period, and there were definitely, moments where I knew what was going on, but Artie wasn't going to admit anything, and I was just there to make the best book possible. So have some fun too, always. But yeah.
Yeah, I teased this episode with a little bit of his cameo page. I don't know if you've talked to him of late. Tell me any communications. Do you keep in touch with him? If you do, how is he? The cameo page makes me a little scared.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to Artie in a minute. Not since the pandemic. I keep tabs on him through people. Artie's tough. Yes, we had just a little bit of a falling out over some bullshit. And on the third book that we did, he was, he was really not in a good way, but he really screwed the pooch in a lot of ways with the book release and promotion and all that stuff, which was frustrating. But part of the territory. I'm not annoyed about that at all. All is forgiven. I love Artie, but no, I haven't talked to him in a minute. Yeah. But like I said, I know I talk to someone who does keep in touch pretty regularly. So I guess it's time. I'd like to talk to him again. I hope he's doing okay. The stuff I've seen make me sad.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know when you wrote the third book, was the nose issue already happening? Did you get to deal with him at that period of time? Because everyone's curious about that period of time because we didn't hear him on the show. So all we had to do was see his Twitter and possibly a podcast.
Yeah. I mean, the second book, Crash and Burn, dealt with the 2 years after Stern and severe depression and getting cleanish. And then he sort of, was set up for this great comeback essentially, with Crashing and all the stuff that shut out town and everything. The nose thing was, again, I was there for the nose. The nose was in the nose, the Dick Tracy nose, I like to call it, was definitely in existence during when we did Want to Bet, the last book. So that was an issue, and he just listen, you can't make someone do something, they're not going to do. As he always said on the show, Artie's going to do what Artie's going to do. So yeah, the nose was happening, and things just got worse. The pandemic was really hard on him, and but he is finally sober now, from everything I hear and from everything I can kind of see, and a changed person, I think, after all the years of abuse. But I don't know, man. It's a sad situation.
What was it like to document him, stabbing himself? That was sort of the weirdest moment because I was a huge fan and a listener, and I really thought, man, if Artie leaves, I won't probably listen to this show. I really don't. I mean, I don't find it as entertaining as it was with him, but I felt just terrible. What was it like to hear that news in your own personal, and then when you recounted with him, what was it like to see him kind of discuss? Because I just went back and I read this part because it's just so crazy that he does talk about it in great detail, but clearly just out of it, right? I mean, just stabbing himself, he had no idea what he was doing.
You hear this a lot from addicts and stuff. He relapsed and had so much shame about it that he just didn't want to be there. So he was stick from the drugs and the shame, and the whole thing sort of came together, and he was out of it. I mean, he drank bleach. You know what I'm saying? And he knew that there was an intervention. I think he knew, or his mom was coming over. I don't think he knew that it was going to be a full intervention with everybody. I'm glad it was, because walking into that would be really hard on anyone to A, deal with quickly and efficiently, and B, the psychological and emotional effects, right, of his poor mother. You know, the thing about Artie that like was always great is that he let me go really detailed. I like to kind of really make whatever I write try to come off the page as much as possible for people, even if it's gross. So, you know, for example, like the pig and shit chapter that's the big was on Stern. He gave me an audio of that. That was kind of how I earned his trust, actually, very early in the Too Fat to Fish process. He gave me the audio of that from on the air and was like, let's see what you do with this. And I wrote the chapter that I wrote that essentially is the way it is. Just like went as detailed as possible, like every micro detail. And that was kind of it. So he knew that, you know, as difficult as it was to actually write, because I have, you know, this guy is my friend, like I care about him. I wanted to do that for that scene as well. And, you know, he gave me the material to do it. He's just, the thing about him is when we would go over the more difficult or just desperate or ridiculous things he had done, he doesn't shy away from the details. So he would be brave about that. And it was like he was talking about somebody else, which in some ways it is, you know, you're that messed up. But he never in any of the books did he have like, I mean, he does have shame, but he didn't shy away from the reality of the most sort of the lowest points of his life.
Yeah, how
I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what we went for.
I was going to say, how do you construct these with him? You know, especially like I said, Crash and Burn is I mean, they're great. Both of them are great, but obviously this one gives you more detail, kind of the background. Okay, he knew what he was doing, because you always wondered like, what was it like trying to kind of craft a book with him, and how do you sort of sit with him? Do you come up with sort of the chapter ideas? Does he kind of just give me that kind of that semantics of that with him?
Sure. Well, Artie, you know, he's a great storyteller, as anyone who's listened to the Stern show when he was on it, which, by the way, I agree with you. Not the same show without him. Just was, and it hasn't been, and Howard's kind of turned a corner, still like one of the greatest interviewers of our lifetime. But anyway, just wanted to agree with you there. You know, he always had a really good sense of what makes a good story and which elements of his life, you know, he wanted to talk about. So more so than, you know, some of the musicians that I'd work with who don't really think in like a necessarily like a linear or a textual sense. Artie kind of had that from just being on the air and doing stand-up. So him telling stories were always great. And there was always, I would kind of go there. I mean, this changed for different times, but the general thing is that we'd get together. He would have some ideas. He would like kind of send them to me, you know, or give me like a notebook with ideas. And we would kind of do sessions where we'd go over certain stories. A lot of times he would just like kind of take the tape recorder and almost like he was doing stand up, like walk around the apartment and shit. And I'd be sitting there and asking follow-up questions. So I'd get like the loose framework from him. Then I would kind of go in and write it, send it to him with questions or with like, you know, jokes, like this is my attempt at a joke. I know you got a better one. And sometimes some of the greatest parts is where Artie was like, that joke's awesome. It stays. And I was like, oh, I'm making him laugh. Yes. So that's kind of how it worked. It would be like, you know, it started to become Too Fat to Fish was obviously like his just autobiography. Right. And then after that, it became everything that happened next, you know? So the structure more became like, you know, his life just got darker and stranger. So that became the structure. Too Fat to Fish was a collection of stories, and I sort of arranged it more like chronologically or asked about different periods of time. But it always kind of fired a wonderful narrative. Like he was just in a better place when we wrote that. So I think he was, yeah, his comedic chops were up. He was on the radio every day, even though he was like falling asleep on the air. He was still killing it. Like anyone who saw him doing stand-up during that period, he was amazing. So it was like throwing material at somebody at the top of their game. It was easier then. The other times were, you know, same process. When Artie would be in a bad place or when we were discussing something that was really hard for him, he started not even wanting to meet. So he would like, he bought a couple of the same recorders that I use for interviews and would do them alone in his house. Some of those recordings are definitely pretty messed up. And then send them to me, and I would have it like, I transcribed it, and then I get in and edit it and do my thing. So that's kind of how it went. He liked the writing process. He like wrote a couple things, but mostly it was like I said, almost like a stand-up routine, oral, recorded, and then I would take it from there, build it up, send it back to him. He would make some changes, make it better, and then that's it.
I'm not an addict. I don't know if you are. I don't want to get into your background, but I just don't. I just, in my head, I think it really hit home, honestly, just recently when Matthew Perry wrote a book and he did an interview circuit. Now, this guy's on Friends, and he's coming drunk and drugged, and just the way he described all of it took me back to sort of Artie thinking, okay, because in my head, I'm like, how is Artie blowing all of these opportunities, going on Stern and Letterman and Conan, and he's on the Joe Bug. Why is he fucking this up all the time? And then after watching,
myself that.
And then I watched the Matthew Perry thing. I'm like, Matthew Perry had way more to lose. He's on a giant show, and it made me sort of understand the whole thing. So watching Dark Side of the Comedy on Vice, you were part of that. I thought you were great, along with a lot of people that have been on this show. Do you think Artie would like that show? Do you think he was proud that he was one of the 10 selected? And thoughts on just what his mindset would be if he saw that show?
Man, I don't know where his head's at. He has been sober, and I'm not, but people very close to me are addicts, are sober, and can always like point out a lot of the psychology involved. And, your whole brain changes essentially when you're totally off of everything for a while. So I don't know how he would process that. I mean, when I did that interview, I got very emotional and just like missed him and, wanted it. I hope that he would see it. You always hope that like something you do or say is going to affect a person like that and maybe help them make a change to just stay around. That's all you can, that's all you can do. Because like, you can send them to rehab as many times as you want. If they don't want to do the work, they're not going to do the work. And obviously substances, the Matthew Perry book was gnarly, and he's somebody that seems very angry still. But I like that he was so real about just how much it controls you and just how repetitive it gets, like that is the thing that you care about more than anything else. Nothing else matters. Just want to like go get high and get fucked up.
And he mentions too, and that the getting off of it is the hardest part, because you feel so good, and now you've got this base of feeling this way, and when you don't have it, now you're not medicated, and this is a 2-week thing, a struggle. So of course, why would you want to feel like shit for 2 weeks if you're going to feel this way? It did finally. I mean, maybe you wrote about it. Maybe maybe I'm just naive, but it really was. I think it was a Diane Sawyer interview or something. But it was very okay. I understand now. When you are that famous, it doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't matter at all. If anything, the fame, and Artie says this in the books a couple of times, that he didn't become an opiate addict until he was rich, and he's glad for that. So the fame, if anything, gives you more passes. Like, you can get away with more shit. Hollywood loves a comeback, but eventually they don't. I think that's what happened to art, to be honest. But I think that the fame makes you feel even more invincible. Or, like, you could just go to a fancy rehab again and clean out before you have to do a project. I think it gives you more excuses.
What did you think of how Howard handled that the last 3 or 4 years? It just, the sleeping on the air became a bit, and he played stupid, as did Robin, as did Fred, and I think finally at the end, obviously they fired him before the end of 2009, but what were your thoughts? It was great radio, it was funny, but at some point you have to really check yourself and go, what are we doing here, right? I mean, what did you think of the way Orlando Jones said it was enabling? Give me your thoughts on just what you heard during...
I agree with Orlando. I totally agree with Orlando. When they were, couldn't be more thankful to have my book that I wrote with him, like, promoted so well for 6 months straight. You know what I mean? Like, they made it a thing. It was like its own bit. It was like, let's talk about this part of the book and all that stuff. That was fantastic. But a lot of it was painful for me to listen to. I listened to all of it, but knowing what he had been through and knowing that he was teetering a little bit, I thought it was too much. Like, I agree with Orlando. I don't think it helped. I think it probably made it seem, it made it into a bit for him. You know, it made it into the thing that people it made him, I think these are the things that people like about you. I think it almost like that's probably the message that he was getting, you know, like, this is what people want. Stories about you being fucked up. That's going to make you want to go get fucked up. It just is, you know, it's like you're an alcoholic shouldn't go, I don't know, wine tasting for 2 weeks, like with people who are wine tasting, you know, something like that. I don't know if I'm making a good enough metaphor, but I think that it was hard to listen to. They were making light of a situation that is certainly funny because it's Artie. He makes waking up in your own shit funny, but it's really not underneath that. So I totally agree that it was a little too celebrated and definitely enabling and in a way making light of it, if that makes sense too.
Well, and he fought everybody on the show too. He fought Teddy, he fought Sal, he fought Richard, and